All right, good evening, everybody. Good evening, fellow directors, past presidents, members, and guests. Welcome to the 116th season of the Empire Club of Canada. I'm Mike Van Sol, and I'm the president of the Empire Club. I'm really excited for this evening's Empire Night when we dig into the second chapter of cannabis legalization in Canada. We really can't do these events without the help of our sponsors, so I'd like to thank them. I would like to thank both of them. First, Global Public Affairs, and second, Castles, who are integral to allowing us to host events like this. I'd also like to acknowledge mediaevents.ca for webcasting this evening's event. I'd like just to say a few words about Empire Nights. These are events that have sort of grown for the Empire Club over the last couple of years. We will all, many of you, I hope, will know of our luncheon events. The evening ones have really sort of taken on a life of their own. It's a simple concept in many ways. Bring out curious and engaged people, hand out some food and share a drink or two, and then put some smart people up on the stage to dig deeper into a topic that we all care about. And then after that, we can stick around a little bit and unpack a little bit of what we heard. So we're well into it, and this is the exact type of events and discussions we'd like to have, and we think they're resonating with folks. And if whatever sector you're from, or if you have an idea of something you think the Empire Club should take on for an Empire Night, feel free to reach out to me or a fellow director. We're certainly always interested in some new ideas. We are going to jump into this. Now. So, from Global Public Affairs, I'm going to ask Alana Sokic to come up. She's a senior consultant there, and she's going to do the next introduction.
Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to Mike for the introduction. On behalf of Global Public Affairs and our GPA Cannabis practice, I'm delighted to be able to help kick things off tonight. For those unfamiliar, Global Public Affairs is Canada's largest privately held government relations and strategic communications firm. With offices from coast to coast, we work to assist companies in the cannabis sector understand the complex regulatory environment and the inherent opportunities and risks as it relates to their commercial objectives. Global strongly supports the Empire Club's mandate to tackle issues that affect the lives of Canadians and explore imaginative and innovative ideas to lead us into the future. With the Empire Club's evening event series, designed to accommodate a changing demographic and audience, as Mike so duly noted, we cannot think of a topic more suitable for tonight than cannabis. With the one-year anniversary of recreational cannabis legalization days away, tonight's panel will seek to reflect on lessons learned, explore emerging trends, and look to intersections with existing industries like technology and pharmaceuticals. It's been said that the legalization of cannabis is a process, not an event. As we continue this process, I look forward to hearing how the insights shared tonight shed light on the industry's next juncture, and hope you all come away with a renewed understanding of the future of cannabis. I'd now like to turn the microphone over to Craig Warden, President of Polaris Strategic Insights, to provide a brief presentation on public and user attitudes, behavior, and intent. Thank you for your time, and welcome, Craig.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure if my mic is working. Everybody hear me okay? Thanks. Okay. All right. Well, thank you to the Empire Club for having me here and for having this event on this auspicious anniversary that's on the horizon. And I want to thank Megan Boyle for inviting me to come join the event, and to all you attendees. I know the urge to go home to a turkey sandwich and maybe some pants with elastic waistbands might have been very strong, but I appreciate everybody coming out. At Polara, we've been doing a lot of research, and then over the years, we've done a lot of research on alcohol use, drug use, all manner of subjects, obviously. But since 2016, we've been doing a lot of research on cannabis, quite in earnest. And that includes for producers, retail brands, interested new entrants who want to enter the sector, in particular this fall. And Since March of 2017, we've been doing a syndicate study for subscribers, and those subscribers include everybody from producers to associations and governments, specifically on this issue. So we've been tracking opinion on Canadians' views on legalization, as well as their usage patterns. And that's why I'm going to show you here tonight some data from that study, mainly from our March 2017 wave, because we're right now just in field with our next wave. So we don't have any fresh data, although we have been watching it a little bit in field. So what I will do is I'm going to take you through briefly to sort of set the stage, if you will, for tonight's conversation about public sentiment, usage patterns, and also some emerging opportunities and challenges that we see. So this is just since this slide you see right here is just from March of 2017. So just 5 months after legalization, we see quite a major increase in acceptance of legalization. So you can see that the previous date, July 2018, we had 42% who were approving, an important number of 19% who were ambivalent, just didn't really care. When those people are pushed to pick a side, they tend to come out on the approval side. That's why we tend to lump them together with the approvals to say that we have 64% who accept. What we find here is basically, despite some worries, the public has seen at 5 months in that the sky did not fall. It is not reefer madness out there. It's reefer mildness, if you will. And this is in March. I would expect that when we're done the current wave of this study, that we'll see even greater, higher levels of acceptance. And these levels are across all demographics and all regions of the province. Now, prior to legalization, Quebec was the center of opposition in terms of geography. In terms of demographics, the Chinese community within English Canada was also sort of the locus of opposition to legalization. What a change. And everybody was afraid of Quebec and their opposition to this. And you can see here that roughly a split now in terms of approval and disapproval, and they have roughly 15% who are ambivalent as well. So acceptance in Quebec in the matter of 5 months, something that nobody could have predicted. And you can see here their approval levels jump 9 points and the disapproval levels drop 11. Now I'm going to take you through 3 slides, and they're busy slides, so I'm going to summarize them for you. But basically this tells the story of how there is a great momentum towards normalization. Nobody's that afraid of cannabis anymore. It is something that's become normalized, kind of become part of life in Canada. On this first slide, you can see that perceptions of usage, and you can see in wave 3, that was July 2018. Wave 4 is March of 2019. So you can see that just 5 months after legalization, we have drops in expectations to what people are seeing in terms of usage of about 20% across the board. You know, it ranges as much as 34% down to 21% in terms of people who see an increase in usage. And one of the biggest concerns, there's 2 big concerns on the public radar, and that is youth usage and road safety, so drug-impaired driving. You can see here that youth usage has gone from 62%, what was the expectation of the increase, down to 33%, so basically cut in half. Quite a remarkable change in just 5 months. Here you can see a number of sort of criminal or crime-based items, the most important one being the rate of drug-impaired driving. In July of 2018, 69% expected an increase. In March, 43% said they were seeing an increase. So quite a drop. I'm not saying these concerns are going away and that we should discount that 4 and 10, because those people have to be brought on board and be assured that things are okay, but quite a drop, and roughly 20% across the board here. And this is in March. I would expect things to be even better now in our current wave when it comes out. And what about those who say, oh, cannabis is going to be a gateway drug to harder drugs? Well, roughly 3 in 10 were expecting that back in July of 2018. And now in March, those figures have been cut roughly in half, down by 13, 15% in terms of opioid use and hard drug use. So that just speaks to the normalization of cannabis. Now let's look at usage. Some really interesting findings here. So in March, 5 months after legalization, we saw reported usage, going up from 13% in the past 12 months to 18%. So a 5-point gain, minor but notable. And then since then, it has now gone up to 29% in August. So that's a gain of 11 points since March. What has happened? I believe 2 things. One, Ontario now has retail. That's something that was not the case in March. And the other thing is, I do believe we're seeing a destigmatization happening. We're having a lot more people being honest in surveys about this. So I do think there is an increase, absolutely, but I also think a lot more people are being honest. That prefer not to say figure used to be around 6 to 8% on each of our surveys. Now it's just down to 2%. We used to laugh at that 6 to 8%, right? And say, well, we know who these people are. And now they're up the ladder into the rest of the graph. You can see that, amongst Canadians, only 8% are daily users. If you bring them in total with weekly users, your daily weekly users are 14% of the population. That is roughly half of the past 12-month cannabis user population. And who are they? Well, there's not a lot of demographic variation. You look at gender, really no difference. You look at people who have kids, who are parents with kids in the household or out of the household, not much difference. We see where we see the biggest differences are amongst those who are under 40, and particularly under 30. But basically, if you're under 40, there's a much higher rate of usage. And geographically, not a lot of difference across the provinces, although BC, I know it's almost stereotypical, but it's true. They do tend to have higher usage rates there. And Atlantic Canada actually has fairly high usage rates as well. Ontario, always comfortable being in the middle, as we see in every single survey, always in the middle. The lowest incidence is in Quebec, so their approval levels have come up. The usage levels have not. They're roughly half the rest of the country. And what are they using for? Primarily, you can see it kind of breaks out into 3/3. A third who say that they're using for relaxation, a third who say they're using for recreation, and roughly a quarter to a third who say they're doing it to reduce anxiety or pain. When you look at daily, weekly users only, they are primarily using for relaxation. Only 5% say they're using for recreation. It's the occasional users who are using it for fun, and that's roughly 4 in 10 to 5 in 10 of occasional users are using for recreation. As of March 2019, just 3% of Canadians, if you look at the total population, tried marijuana for the first time after legalization. So not a huge increase. Now, I do think in our current survey, I think we're going to see a decent increase there of that figure. But this is largely people coming on board who have used in the recent past, not in the distant past, and who are using both after and before. This side is particularly interesting to us as we try to monitor emerging trends. What is the most often used form? That's the blue bar. The yellow bar is what else are you using? But you can see here that flower or dry bud is by far the most popular form used, not a surprising result. But if you look at edibles, you can see that over the waves, it has increased quite a bit. So going from July 2018 at 32% up to 48% in March, before it's actually even legal. You can see that legalization's given license to people to sort of get on some of these bandwagons early. And you can see oils have also increased by 6% after legalization. We didn't actually ask about creams or capsules and soft gels, but I think it's notable that 10% of Canadians in March are using capsules and soft gels. Now, where are they buying? As of March, 6 in 10 said they were buying legal. 10% said they were buying illegal only, and 22% said they were buying from both sources. I do think there's some underreporting here of illegal buying. There kind of has to be. If we take that 11% and lump them in with the others, you have around 43% who are buying illegal. And that's probably closer to the truth. If not, it might be higher. But when we ask people what's their intent in the future, amongst Canadians, the intent to buy legally is 2.5 times greater than the intent to buy illegally. Now, I just want to quickly run through some emerging opportunities and challenges. First, we took a look at the alternative market. So that's edibles, oils, infusibles, topicals. And we kind of figured out, we estimated what that market would be. And you can see the small figure, so in this case, the 9% total alternate market, that's those who are very likely to buy this, in this new format. If you total them with those who say they're somewhat likely or open to considering, that brings you to a potential market of 30%. You can see throughout, the numbers aren't that different by market, and you can see that throughout, CBD only has the greatest chance of expansion there. Who are these people that are interested? It's basically the same demographic profile as we saw for cannabis users. And amongst cannabis users, you can see, of course, they are the most likely buyers. Perhaps what's most interesting is that we have 1 in 10 of those who say they've never tried cannabis who are potential users of these different formats. And some emerging challenges. I think there's 2 things here. One, public and user education are sort of big obstacles or challenges in the way. The public is not that familiar with cannabis. They're not, especially once you dig deep and get into strains and compounds. CBD has potential, but only 4 in 10 Canadians have actually expressed any familiarity with CBD, and only 4 in 10 know the difference between THC and CBD. Similarly, only 4 in 10 say they know the difference between indica and sativa. And in terms of risks beyond marketing, 1/4 of users say that they drove high in the past year, something that is a big concern and that needs to get, I think, greater education, much like we did with alcohol. What are some other limits to CBD-only growth? Because I think a lot of people are targeting that market. When it comes to users, there's not a lot of demand for CBD only. They've used it, but only 7% prefer CBD only. They want the THC. And in terms of retailing, 25% of Canadians would prefer to sell that CBD only be sold in licensed stores only. You're not at every cash register like when you go down to legal states in the United States. And price, or the black market. Right now, 49% of cannabis users say that it is more expensive to buy legally. They're saying that it's roughly, back in March, a $2 per gram difference, and I would say it's probably even higher now because the black market has become incredibly aggressive at reducing their prices. Black market also doesn't have the supply issues that we've seen, and there is also the other challenge of concerns about online privacy and being able to cross the border after your credit card's been linked to the cannabis store. And finally, vaping. We asked whether or not cannabis users have used via vaping, and we saw that roughly half of daily weekly users have in the past 12 months, and 4 in 10 have in the past 12 months who are monthly users. This presents a sort of competition to new entrants into the market, like at the infusibles. I think this is a sort of a key delivery vehicle piece that is a competitor to infusibles going forward. And then, of course, there's the question of health risks, which we've all seen lately. And there's a bit of a debate there, actually, when you look at the science. But that is something that's going to have to be tackled in the days ahead. So that brings me to the end of that presentation, and I know that we have to move this behind me, so I'm happy to take any questions while we do that, if anybody has any. Yes. So what I could tell you is that both illegal and legal purchasers are happy with the quality of product that they get. Where the difference comes in terms of legal versus illegal purchasing is convenience and speed and price. So price is king. We've always seen that in all of our research leading up to legalization. The only way you're going to get long-term users out of the black market is by competing on price. I think they'll come on board and find that the stores are generally convenient as long as they have the supply once you match on price.
Hi. Hi, over here. I'm wondering if you went a little deeper on the CBD question, because I have to imagine that based on just market activity in markets where we see that people are accessing CBD products through different channels, that through a channel that is much more of a natural health product channel or a consumer health product oriented channel, that the CBD interest from consumers would be higher than when you're looking at it in the traditional cannabis store channel, where presumably people are much more interested in THC products. So I'm just wondering if you did any research in that space, and if you dug a little deeper on the CBD thing, you might end up with different results.
Yeah, I think what's important to remember with CBD only is that the public isn't actually that knowledgeable about it. Only 4 in 10 say they're even somewhat familiar with it. So it is not the pervasive product that we think it might be, but it is the sort of next frontier in terms of bringing in new users. It's going to be the CBD only that's going to attract the new users who haven't experimented before. Yeah.
Hi, Ziggy. Is there any data on how many users grow their own cannabis?
Oh, yes. Yes, there is. It is not very high. We asked that question about 2 years ago. It's a pretty small portion of the population. Yeah.
First, before I ask a question, will your presentation be available to us?
I think so. Yeah.
And two, just curious about the method of research that you're using. Are you using phone calls or in-house interviews? What?
We're doing an online survey of 2,000 Canadians randomly selected from online research panels.
I'm wondering if you dissected the data on the demographics of users purchasing through legal channels versus the black market, specifically with respect to the question of satisfaction over quality. Yeah. My intuition would be that your black market purchaser might be more savvy and that your legal cannabis consumer may be more naive and not able to differentiate on the basis of quality.
That may be the case because they're both quite happy with quality, both in terms of potency and effect. So, they're both quite satisfied, both those channels. But you have different types of users in each, right? So I'm sure one user would look down on the other. One of the key factors for the legal purchasers is safety. They're really drawn to the legal world because it's safer in their view. Yeah.
Is there any impact on brand loyalty amongst regular users of dry flower, let's say, for brands who appear to be moving towards infused products?
Even daily, weekly users do not understand the brands yet. So the world of brands is a whole new thing for users, even the daily, weeklies. The awareness levels, even amongst daily, weeklies, is just above half.
Rephrase, is there data on the acceptance amongst regular users of dry flower of infused products?
Yes, I would say all current users are quite open to trying out all new edibles, infusibles, you name it. They're really on board. Yeah.
I'll let you, Craig. Craig will be available for more questions at the end. I want to bring up our other panelists for the next part of the discussion. Our first panelist is the co-founder of Canada's first and leading cannabis accelerator, Leaf Forward. Someone who is well-versed in the disruptive innovation space, please welcome Chang. Sorry. Next up, our next panelist is the Managing Director of Leafy Canada, Canada's fastest growing cannabis information resource, which supports awareness, accessibility, and innovation regarding legal cannabis market. Please welcome Joe Voss. To complete our panel of thought leaders in Canada's cannabis market, we have the National Director of Government Relations at Aurora, Canada, an expert in balancing government priorities and the needs of an emerging marketplace. Please welcome Andrea Paine. And next, I would like to introduce tonight's panel moderator. She is an award-winning journalist and a cannabis industry reporter with the Financial Post. Please welcome Vanmala Subramaniam.
Hi, can everyone hear me? Okay, great. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. All right, so there's a lot I want to get through today, and we are going to talk about 2.0, but I really want to start with getting the panelists' take on what the last 1 year has been. So maybe that's where we'll start. So, I wrote a long piece kind of summarizing what the last 1 year has been, and a couple of stats stood out to me. So one of them was, of course, the markets haven't performed as well as maybe people thought they were, and investors have actually, if you look at the top 10 cannabis companies, overall by market cap, they're down something like 57%. So it's actually been if you think about it as a 1 year investment, it's not been very good. At the same time, a year ago we had no legal stores, and today we have hundreds of legal stores across the country. Granted, most of them are in Alberta, about 300 are in Alberta. But maybe Brett, I'll start with you. What has stood out for you in the last 1 year? And I'll go around to all the panelists, but yeah.
Sure. I think the concept of legalization has been a huge success. I think we saw in the data that Craig showed that acceptance is here, that most people are okay with cannabis, and that the sky has not fallen on them, that more and more people are trying cannabis and experimenting with cannabis and using cannabis in new and interesting ways. Now, have there been barriers on that road? Absolutely, but I think most of those barriers are within the industry itself. I think the concept has been a huge success. I think the federal government deserves credit for what they've done and the path they've chosen to take. Now, when it comes to the industry and the business side, there's been lots of issues. The supply shortage was an issue. The lack of retail in Ontario was an issue. I think we're still asking the question today of if it's even possible to build a brand in Canada. That remains to be an issue today, and it will remain to be an issue for as long as these regulations exist. So on the business side, I think that expectations need to be tempered and should have been more sober when people were making the calls on whether to invest in these companies. But conceptually and from a policy standpoint, I think it's been a huge success. I think Craig's data shows that.
Mm-hmm. Joe, what about for you? If you had to pick one thing in the last 1 year that has stood out, or if you reflect on the last 12 months, what has really stood out to you?
I think it's tough to pinpoint one thing. Just kind of touching on what he said around policy, the one thing that I would like to see is just policy being an enabler of, let's call it future legalization or Cannabis 2.0. There's a couple things that we're an agnostic platform, so we work with all retailers and brands in the space. And so we get to kind of open the kimono with a lot of licensed producers out there and licensed retailers to get a sense of actually what's happening. And so it's been interesting to kind of help them solve challenges around marketing, messaging, trying to reach their end consumer. I think that the other piece is really is First Nations. I think that's a huge miss for me. And for Leafly as a whole, I think that we are starting to get there. But I was actually just speaking to someone in the room about how First Nations are looking to create autonomy within their own jurisdictions, so that they can also have the economic opportunity, which is
you mean in terms of including them. We haven't done a very good job in including them.
Correct.
In the market, right?
Correct. I think BC, their policy is a little bit more advanced in terms of how they've approached. Ontario has now licensed 8 First Nations jurisdictions, or they have 8 licenses that are able to get into the market. But there's a lot of work to do on that front.
Okay. Craig, you made a couple of great points in your presentation, but I want to talk to all of you about the black market versus the legal market. So my stats, when I went through Health Canada data and Statistics Canada, tell me if I'm wrong, is I calculated that the black market has kind of eaten into legal market territory by about 14%. And to me, when I look at that in the span of a year, I think that's quite little. But what would you say about that statistic in terms of how much the legal market has kind of succeeded?
Yeah, I think where they've succeeded is that they've really jumped on the price and pushed it down. And we're very interested to see our most recent results, which we'll have in a couple weeks, just to see how much that's eaten into it. I think at the end of the day, when it comes to occasional in the past and new users, they're not going to go to the illegal market. The illegal market is an issue with the core user prior to legalization. And at the end of the day, it is about price. And if we can get the price down, then people will move.
Right. And Andrea, your, I guess, role and your job at Aurora, which I find very fascinating, is essentially talking to ministers and kind of liaising with the government on. So, from their point of view, perhaps, and I know you can't speak for them, but from the conversations you're having in the last 12 months, is this a kind of a general anxiety that the government is going through where we haven't been able to really get rid of the black market in the last 1 year? Would you frame it that way?
Well, I think generally speaking, governments, whether it's federal, provincial, to a certain degree municipal, made their regulations and developed policy with the goal to eliminate the black market. I mean, I think that, and public health was probably the top on their minds when they were when we were legalizing and bringing all this legislation through. Yes, there's an issue with pricing right now, but there's also an issue with taxing. And the legal product is being taxed enormously. If you look at excise tax combined with provincial sales tax, combined with HST as well, I mean, there's a lot of tax being put on top of the price of the product. And that in itself is driving this market to increase in price. So, my conversations with elected folk are revolving around there. It's first of all, we're a medical company, so Aurora deals mostly with medical patients, and in Europe it's almost uniquely with medical patients. But we represent them as well with government by saying it's unfair to tax medical patients their medicine. So these conversations are things that we have all the time. Provincially, we have those same conversations as well. Simply because provinces reap the rewards of excise tax. So 75% of those proceeds go to the provinces, and in turn, they're supposed to be giving those to municipalities as well for things like education programs and law enforcement. So we have those conversations at all levels of government.
Mm-hmm. And just a follow-up, because I'm very fascinated by this, would you say that, the governments have started realizing that, okay, we're getting money from this, and they're less incentivized to kind of budge on the excise tax issue?
Well, that's an interesting question, because on a lot of the meetings that I have, there's always somebody in the corner with their calculator and their pencil calculating how much they think they're going to be making out of taxation, particularly. But yeah, they do realize that it's a very lucrative industry, and they reap a lot of rewards through taxes that they can use for other means. But they're also a lot more educated now because of people like us, where we go and have those conversations about, well, look, you may be taxing and getting all this money back, but on the other hand, you're not, your original goal of bringing down that black market isn't really coming to reality.
Right. And Joe, speaking of the original goal of bringing down the black market, share with me your thoughts about product quality in terms of what exists on the legal market, based on, you're hearing a lot of feedback.
Sure. I think just to touch on a couple other things, which is, the goal broadly for the industry is to foster a legal market and to get rid of the illicit. Yes. And so we know that those are a lot of the factors are product pricing and availability. So we have 8 million users in Canada. Those people are coming to Leafly looking for education and, trying to find legal retailers and legal brands. I would say, if we want to be successful, we need to create products and services that are going to be able to service a legal market, which is, I think, part of the broader challenge, right? So it's looking at digital tools and services that would be available to any other CPG company out there, because eventually, and I mean even now, cannabis is, based on the stats that we're starting to see, a mainstream product for mainstream people. So I think digital innovation and technology is a huge piece of that, and just accessibility. In terms of quality, I mean, we are gathering data in 2 sets on Leafly. So one is subjective and objective data. So we work with labs across North America to test. So we work with vetted labs to test cannabis to get a sense of what the chemical makeup of the plant is. That's THC, CBD compound, and terpenes. Which is important because we want consumers to understand what they're consuming. And then on the flip side of that, we're combining that with user reviews, which if you put those 2 pieces together, it actually tells a really compelling story when you comparatively show, terpene content against a user review, what is energizing, what is not. I would say the sentiment is not great.
Right, exactly.
That's long-winded answer, but it's not great. Yes. I think there's a lot of disappointment. I think anecdotally, what I spend a lot of time on our site looking at user reviews, trying to get a sense of who's making waves in the marketplace. It's for that a lot of mid-tier craft growers. So I'm looking at West Coast companies, interesting like Panelists Labs, Broken Coast, Supreme, and then I think unfortunately we also see a lot of blowback from just the retail environment, right? Like I think it's less about what the licensed producer is also creating. It's about the barriers to entry from the retail perspective, whether it's a slow delivery or I had to wait in line or a number of various factors where people are just not getting what they want immediately. We crave convenience.
Brett, from your dealings with cannabis startups kind of emerging in Toronto, would you say that is, I guess, what are the biggest obstacles right now, a year into legalization?
Yeah, I think it's a really tough time for cannabis startups in Canada. And there was the expectation that once cannabis was legalized, that there would be this explosion of entrepreneurial activity. And that just wasn't the case. And there's a number of reasons for that. One, the supply shortage really hit these companies hard. So if you were an entrepreneur in Canada and you had a brand or a product that you wanted to bring to market, finding the supply to actually formulate that product was very challenging. And then on top of that, finding the space was really tough. So if you went to a big LP and you said, hey, can I have 500 square feet and X amount of product so that I can formulate my ready-to-bake cookie, infused ready-to-bake cookie, it was near impossible. Producers were strained in terms of the supply that they had themselves and the space that they wanted to use for their own brands. And so on the CPG front, which is where the expectation was going to be for lots of entrepreneurial activity, that's been basically dried up. Now this will solve itself eventually. Once there's more space, once there's more supply online, that will all work itself out once there's contract manufacturing. But right now, it's really, really tough. I think it's been disheartening and discouraging for a number of entrepreneurs who started in that space. And so if I was to give entrepreneurs advice today who wanted to get into cannabis, make a product in an adjacent industry. Build up that brand, build up that audience, make sure it's compliant, and then go to the LPs and have more leverage than just walking in with a product or an idea or a brand that you wanted to slap on a product.
Do entrepreneurs in cannabis generally find the marketing restrictions by the government a big problem? Is that something that they really have to be innovative about?
Yeah, I absolutely, like everyone in the industry, I don't think it's any tougher. It might be slightly tougher for entrepreneurs because they don't have the legal resources to explore what different avenues are actually available to them. They're doing that on their own, which is tough and can cause problem for them. Largely speaking, though, I think that the marketing regulations are definitely good on a public health standpoint, and on the business side, that's a separate issue from whether cannabis legalization was a success. And so if you maintain those regulations as they are, yeah, you may not be able to build these massive brands, but I think as other countries are looking at it, they're thinking to themselves, we see cannabis as this new drug that we want to legalize, and they classify it the same way as they do tobacco, and that's probably going to be the future in Canada and other places. And so you might as well just get used to it the way it is, and I just don't see it going anywhere.
Okay, what do you think, Andrea? You definitely have had conversations, I'm sure, with government officials about easing marketing restrictions.
Absolutely. We find, I think it was prior to legalization, actually, it was a lot easier to brand. We had our medical patients for medical cannabis because that existed for several years before the product was actually legalized for adult use. So it was a lot easier to brand. We would send out our product to patients who directly through the internet went and made their order, and it was delivered through Canada Post or another delivery service to their door. Once legalization came about, there were a lot of things that changed, particularly for patients. So again, the lack of being able to brand or advertise or, the taxation issues as well have kind of tied our hands, not only for the big LPs, but for any entrepreneur that's coming in. And it's a shame in a way because really we are global leaders. We have that. Really, we have two good opportunities here. One, that in Europe, there's a lot of interest in particularly medical cannabis now. But number two, the US, although there are many states that have legalized, it's not a federally legalized product yet. And that means that Canada really has a foothold of the global industry. And we need to keep that foothold if we want to move ahead. And in order to do that, we need the tools that include marketing and branding in a tasteful way and according to some regulations, but we need more tools than we have at the moment.
Mm-hmm. And Craig, do you think this marketing branding restriction is an even bigger problem given Cannabis 2.0 and the number of products that are going to come on board? Because I'm just thinking about someone who has not much knowledge about cannabis and doesn't know the methods in which you can consume it. When they go into a shop, like everything's just going to be plain packaging, right? Like, what do you know? How do you know what you're getting? And what are your thoughts on 2.0?
Well, I think these regulations existed because that's what the public wanted. So governments did their research and they discovered that the public was very concerned about legalization. They wanted strict marketing.
Or the government didn't want to appear to be too, right, I guess, liberal, right? Like, yeah. I mean, I think it was straddling a line
with concerns
there.
about youth usage amongst the public. So that's why they exist. And then when it comes to edibles and things like that, alternative forms, the public has less familiarity and higher concern with these new formats because it's something they don't understand. So it's a little bit scarier for them. So they're going to want these guidelines to be in place in a similar way, if not more strict. So I can't see them going away.
And Craig, do you know, the industry, I mean, this is, anyone jump in and comment on this. To me, covering this industry, I've noticed in the last, say, 4 or 5 months, there's a push by industry to say, hey, you know, we weren't doing that well with just bud and flower, but Cannabis 2.0 is coming, and that's really going to be the solution. So we're going to see this huge increase in demand, like this is it, vape pens, I mean, maybe Brett or Craig, anyone jump in. What do you think about that idea that, there's going to be a vast improvement in how the industry is viewed because of 2.0?
I think in terms of eliminating the black market, that definitely is the big shift. So there are kind of two main reasons why people, or at least in my opinion, why people are going to the black market. And it's one, that it's not a very accessible product right now. If you want to buy it, there's only, 25 stores in Toronto, and most people don't live within 5 kilometers of one. So that's a huge challenge. You can just call up your dealer and they'll come by your house and drop it off for you. And the second big challenge too is that there are all these products that people want and enjoy, and they can't get them on the legal market. And so once Cannabis 2.0 opens up, it solves that problem. And then once there's more retail available in Ontario and other jurisdictions, it solves the other problem. And I actually, we charge a lot for alcohol in Canada. It's pretty expensive here. It's more expensive than many other countries.
Right.
And yet everyone still buys from the LCBO. And so I think that once that Cannabis 2.0 switch happens, once there's more retail, it all kind of solves itself, and you'll see that black market go away much quicker.
Do you agree with that assessment, Joe?
Not wholly. I think, not to be provocative, I think there's, even what we see in the States, flour's number one.
Yeah,
it's the number one thing that consumers are looking for, and that's not just a Canadian thing, that's across the States too. So, I think it's, yes, accessibility. What I'm worried about is the fragmentation that you're seeing in a retail environment, because people are going to go to stores, they're going to be looking for products, hopefully products that don't taste like Brussels sprouts. and every single store, independent or corporate, has a different model in terms of how they're going to bring education to the forefront. So I think, we need an industry standard that's going to talk to that, both on the consumer side and the LP and the retail side. So I think that's going to be a challenge, because people are walking in store, the first person that they're talking to is an education advisor, consultant, a bud tender. Mm-hmm. And so we need to get our story straight, and we have to understand, what the outcomes are going to be with those four factors. So, do I think it's going to solve the challenge or solve the problem? No, but I think hopefully in 5 years, we'll see an 80% coverage.
Yep.
That would be, that's what we aspire to. But, I think it's just going to take time.
And Craig, are you confident about, or I guess, what do you think about the number of Canadians who are not currently consuming, who are going to now be converted just because there are new products on the market? So say, they didn't want to roll a joint, or flower is just not their thing. Do you think there's a large cohort of those people that exist?
We're not seeing that in the data just yet. I think, when we see our next wave, I think you'll see a jump in that potential market, because right now you can see that back in March, the biggest market for the alternative formats is about 30%. I think now we're looking at maybe around 40 to 45% that are potential, and that they might be open to considering it, or very or somewhat likely to try. So, I do think it's out there. I don't think it's going to be a massive new wave, but it'll be something.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I think there's just a huge opportunity with the wellness consumer, because we're seeing on Leafly, if people are looking for medical advice, they're kind of looking for rec, but it falls within that wellness category where they're trying to solve for themselves at home, whether it's anxiety, sleep, chronic pain. They want to just take the edge off after a long day. We're all overworked. We have all these problems, and I think everyone's kind of looking to cannabis to solve that. So I think that's just a huge opportunity. So I think we're going to see a lot of, hopefully, like one-to-one products and CBD products where, consumers right now are going into stores and they're saying, I want the biggest bang for my buck. I want the highest THC product and at the lowest possible price. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And that's just, I think we need to shift that way of thinking and start to educate people around the fact that high THC isn't always the winner. It doesn't always work for everybody.
Yeah,
and we see as well, through at Aurora, I think one of the largest growing segments of the population in terms of cannabis use is actually 55 plus and CBD. They're all really interested. My own mother, who lives in just north of Toronto, is the queen of weed, and she really is like a very straight person, but people go and talk to her all the time now and ask about We've heard about CBD. We're really interested in knowing more. How can we get a prescription? Who do we talk to about, starting to use it? I mean, these are the types of things that we're getting. The one-to-one stuff as well. I think it's really, and it's not necessarily high THC. It's really somebody that's using it for wellness, that's trying to reduce anxiety, to maybe relax a little bit, get a good night's sleep, that type of thing.
Or just go out on a Saturday morning and do their groceries
Yes,
in peace.
Exactly.
Right. And Andrea, would you say that the LPs, I know you can't speak for all of them, but Aurora in particular, were generally content with the draft, with the regulations on 2.0? In terms of the THC limit, which I think is, am I right? Is it 10%? It's 10% in one package, right?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
10 milligrams.
Yeah.
10 milligrams,
Yep.
sorry. Yeah.
The one thing I can say for Health Canada is they were really good at consulting with the industry.
Okay.
I can say without a doubt that they spoke with us, they made the regulations, they re-spoke with us. You really can't bash them for that. Do I agree with all of them? No, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think that, well, for me, my biggest issue is the advertising and and branding, and also the taxation, which are my two main things.
Yeah.
But they did a good job at consulting. A lot of the provinces did as well. Some not so much. We can use, you were talking about Quebec before.
Yeah.
The new Quebec government, the CAQ government that was elected in November, brought in a new law, Bill 2, which hasn't passed yet, but is about to, and then subsequently tabled a few little regulations quietly this summer while everybody's on holidays in mid-July, without consulting the industry, without even letting us know that they were publishing in the Quebec Gazette. Mm-hmm. And so, we've had a lot of issues with the province and not consulting, and particularly with the industry, because the health minister there really dislikes us with a passion. He actually runs away from me.
Send him my way.
Go ahead, Joe. Jump in then Brett.
I was going to say, let's call it Quebec aside as a market opportunity, or just, how they're embracing legalization. I do think that at the federal and provincial level, policymakers, regulators are becoming more open and more proactive. Mm-hmm. I have seen a huge shift from day one, 2 years ago, when I started, to now, where I'm able to have an open, proactive conversation and really get something back. So it doesn't just feel like I'm throwing a dart against a wall. It's really, a two-way conversation. We're trying to solve a problem together. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Yeah. But I think the dialogue is the most important piece.
Right.
Education.
Yep.
And we've progressed a long way in Canada in terms of education. I was at a conference in Manchester a couple of weeks ago, and when you're in the UK, it just makes me laugh when you sit on these panels, or you listen to panels and different people discussing even medical cannabis, and some of the questions that come up where you feel like you're in a time warp when you come from Canada, because you've been there and you've heard this before, and we've kind of progressed on.
Right. Brett, you had a point.
I was just going to say that, I think the Quebec example, and I think the work everyone's doing on the public affairs side is all very important, but it really shows you that there's a disconnect between what the public actually wants and cares about versus what the industry cares about. Yeah. Cannabis is not an issue for the general public. It was never been mentioned in the election, at least not that I've heard of. No one's talking about it as an election issue. It really is behind the scenes. There's And the fact that the Quebec health minister could put in all these different amendments that actually have a meaningful impact on the industry and get away with it without anybody saying anything shows you that it's really tough to break through on that end. And so I wouldn't expect any significant changes to happen to the existing regulations simply because it's not a political priority.
So even when it comes to, advertising, marketing, you think, I guess, is your point that if there's no push from the public and the consumer for any kind of change to the status quo, no one's really going to be compelled to do it?
I'd be hard-pressed to find a normal consumer of cannabis who would say to me, please, can we get better branding? If they can get their product, if they can get their product and they can get high, I think they're probably fine. And if they can get good quality product and bad quality product, I think they're generally pretty good. Not to say that it's not an important issue. I think it is important for Canada economically. I think it's good public policy. But to find an average consumer who cares about this stuff, I think is challenging. And so it's really tough to break through in government to get them to make changes to the existing regulation.
But I guess the argument, Craig, would be, not to harp on about this branding thing, but the argument would be, if you allow marketing and branding, it will only bring people in who never thought they wanted to try cannabis into the market. Is that fair to say?
The government doesn't want people to try cannabis.
Right.
The point of the public policy is to have
they don't want
keep it the same.
You're right.
There's not a lot of incentive to the government, right? Like, what's the incentive to government to try and expand things when that introduces risk, where they might get backlash?
Well, the industry would say that's the whole idea, is to wipe out the black market, and if you want to do that, they can brand, they can advertise their products in their own way. Like if you walk into an illegal dispensary, like you'll know what I'm saying, but and the industry can't. So I guess that would be the incentive, the only thing I can think of. But Andrea, what do you think?
From a medical perspective, I mean, you see all those advertisements. They're allowed to brand. You're allowed to brand a bottle of Tylenol. Which, if you had the whole thing, would be a lot more worse on your health or a bottle of opioids. You can go and get those with no problem, but cannabis, you have to buy the plain package. And why? You can go online today, if you're talking about the edibles market, you can go online and select a wide variety of edible products that are beautiful and lovely labels, well packaged. You can order them just by clicking and saying, yes, I'm 18 or over, or I'm 19 and over, and Canada Post will bring those right to your door. And even with a lovely packaging. They may even hand deliver to your door. This is what the legal industry has to compete with. And it's like you mentioned the Brussels sprouts. We've had those conversations on what is a product that is not going to be enticing to kids? What shape is not enticing to kids? What flavor is not enticing to kids? And basically, you get Brussels sprouts, broccoli, blood pudding, a variety of really exciting flavors that people are going to flock out to buy that legal product.
Yeah. But and I said that the cannabis was not an issue during this election. It actually was. Now I think about it. Only a couple days ago, the Conservative Party of Canada was running in simplified Chinese advertisements claiming that the Liberals were going to legalize all drugs. And so this is the risk that elected officials are looking at, thinking that if I budge on these advertising restrictions, if I go a little bit easier on them and I make products a little bit more colorful and I might allow an ad here or there, next thing you know, and this is a community that I'm part of, but I've got 100 Chinese Canadians outside my constituency office telling me that I'm getting their kids hooked on weed. And so that's the big risk that they're looking at as well. And so it's important to put yourself in their shoes to see what they're dealing with. And that's why we tell all of our portfolio companies that don't expect things to change anytime soon. It's going to be a real process, and it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of education that everyone on the stage is doing to get elected officials to a point where they're comfortable with making that change.
Well, it's all about their voters, right? For politicians, it's the higher the voices are and the more prolific they are, the better it's going to be for them. They'll tend to, if 60% of the people of their constituency are very strongly opposed to cannabis, then they're not going to do anything about it. Same way if it's the opposite. But, we have seen, and it has been part, behind the scenes, but part of the campaigns, you've got the Green Party that's got on their platform that they're going to reduce taxes. That's because of the work of people like us that go and have those conversations with them. Expungement as well is another topic of conversation that we have, and we've seen politicians talking about that. We even have Andrew Scheer on tape when he was at the Saskatoon Chamber of Commerce, maybe 3 or 4 weeks before the launch of the election, saying that he understood the plight of medical patients and was willing to look at removing the taxes. So obviously, some of the education that we've been doing behind the scenes is working. Right. It's just a matter of people writing their MPs or talking with them or the candidates that are in their ridings and having that discussion.
But I guess as Craig pointed out in your slides, the stigma overall is kind of reducing, right? Like 1 year after legalization.
Quite rapidly when you think about it.
Yeah, okay.
Very.
Yeah. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit. We're at 7:30. I want to talk about, Brett, the capital markets and just kind of, it's very investor sentiment right now towards cannabis companies is a bit subdued. Their earnings aren't great, although Aurora posted pretty good earnings today, I thought. When you talk to startups trying to get in, what is the scene like in terms of raising money? Has it become more difficult?
Yeah, I think objectively so. Expectations have really tempered about where the Canadian industry is going. Once legalization actually came to be and we actually started to see real sales numbers and what the appetite for cannabis products are, how many new users are coming online every month, investors began to kind of come to their senses and realize that the valuations that they were giving these companies were far inflated than what they actually should be. It doesn't help either that there hasn't been this massive wave of country after country after country legalizing recreational cannabis. And so, the markets have definitely changed, and I think it's up to companies to adjust to it. Like every market, you ride the wave on certain things, and so, extraction was a real hot part of the industry and remains to be. If you look at companies like Vitalis and MetaPharm Labs, their valuations have grown a lot. I think the next thing is going to be international, and not necessarily on the cultivation and the production play, but in terms of brands, in terms of accessing those markets. But it's definitely pretty hard for a Canadian cannabis startup to raise money in this environment, and it will remain to be until we see some type of movement on either profitability or growth in the market as a whole, or something happen internationally, which could happen sooner than we think. New Zealand's having a referendum in November 2020, and so that might tip off some action. But until then, I think it's going to be pretty quiet.
Right. And, Craig, maybe you can comment on this. There's this kind of idea out there, not really an idea, but there are statistics out there that really show you that the LPs are harvesting a lot of cannabis, and perhaps they might not be able to convert all of that into new products for Cannabis 2.0. So there might be a supply glut. And, I think a bunch of analysts have already kind of commented on this. So what are your thoughts on the supply-demand imbalance when we start seeing 2.0 come on board to Canadians? Are we going to see a shortage like we did a year ago when the industry first took off? And Joe, feel free to weigh in too on this.
Yeah, and I'm more looking at the way the public and users are seeing it. I think if there is an improvement in supply and the freshness of supply, that will go a long way to helping bring longtime users into the legal market. Mm-hmm. But can we expect that? I'm not sure. Right. Because it always takes a long time, and I think it's understandable that we had these supply issues. You can't expect companies to be ramped up just like that and ready to push things into the stores, especially when the stores don't even exist. So, we might be running into the same situation.
What do you think, Joe? Do you think we'll be running into the same situation this time?
I think that, so I was speaking with someone in the back about the timeline and how I was looking back last year at just legalization as a whole. We were gearing up for a big event. Everybody was spending money. Tweed posters were all over town. Like, marketing budgets were big, which was exciting, but also a bit much. So, I think it's not going to happen on the 17th. We have the 17th, there's going to be a consultation period. The first wholesale order is probably going to get shipped on the 17th, of December.
Exactly.
And so we're probably not going to see supply in store until possibly January. So, we've got this kind of interesting timeline that we're working with where everything is in flux. Also, if you think about all of the companies who are pouring money into R&D, research, product development, which may or may not be approved by Health Canada, like that's a whole separate issue, combined with kind of what used to be a really bullish outlook on cannabis as a whole, tied with even companies like WeWork, Uber. Yeah. So it's kind of all rolled up into this really interesting package, which is a whole other thing.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's a good place to end. I'm going to open the floor up to questions now to any of our panelists. Go ahead, and just direct the question at whomever.
You mentioned rightfully a percentage of dropping, 57%. I'm not pro or for or against cannabis. However, the shares had gone up 3,000% prior to that.
Right.
So,
Right. I'm just talking about in the 12-month period. But yes, that's very accurate. Yes.
Just wanted to say that.
Yes. Questions? Okay, right at the back. There's a microphone next to you. Okay.
I don't know if is this working? Okay. With cannabis right now, it's sort of grow locally, sell locally from a provincial perspective. At least we're not really importing a lot. But like alcohol, we're going to get wine from Paris, from Italy. What are your thoughts on the Latin American market? They have a much larger market, a user base. You get a couple cities in Mexico, which can much larger than Canada's in total. So what are your thoughts on the Latin American market and how Canada can remain competitive in the future?
Who wants to take that? Brett, maybe you can take that. Thoughts on the Latin American market?
So I don't think Canada, and I can't say never, but I can say pretty close to never, will ever allow the import of cannabis from Latin American markets. It's tough because they can grow so much cheaper and so much efficiently than we can here because the climate's better, that the moment that you allow that product to come freely into Canada, you basically eliminate all of the domestic licensed production jobs here. It'd be really tough to compete against that. Now, internationally, there needs to be a global supply chain. You have all these new markets coming online, and they're not going to have the cultivation assets needed to supply those markets. For example, Germany. Germany has had a chronic supply shortage ever since they legalized medicinal cannabis, and they will continue to until they build out more domestic assets and until that global supply chain comes online. But the important thing to remember is that once these countries like Colombia, like Thailand, like Australia can start producing at scale, then it becomes a commodity like any other commodity, and you're competing against a global marketplace. And at that point, it's a race to the bottom. So one of the companies that we invested in, well, they look at that and they say, well, how do we learn from this Paine experience, this third wave, which is brands, and how do we take brands to all these different emerging markets and buy that product from the global supply chain and distribute it locally? That, I think, is the future. But I feel good about the Latin American market. They can just grow better. It's better climate. Colombia is the largest flower market in the world. Most of the flowers you buy comes from there. So they know how to grow this stuff, and they can do a pretty good job at it.
But some of the licensed producers, such as us, and there are some of the bigger ones that are Canadian, that are investing and are in, we're in 25 countries, including Latin America. So we have facilities down there already, and we're growing down there, just like we're growing in many of the different European countries now. We're building facilities. Copenhagen is one example. We're building in Germany. Germany is a very big market now, and we own the largest distributor in Germany. So the European market for sure is coming up very strong on medical, and there are a lot of countries right now that are moving very quickly towards that, quicker than we actually anticipated.
Okay.
Maybe I can really quickly touch on the consumer side. What I think is really interesting too is that you through Leafly you can see hot pockets, emerging markets, so you can get a sense of which consumers or which consumer bases are really turned on to medical, wellness, recreation. So kind of in tandem with what's happening from a production standpoint, we start to see a lot of growth, double-digit growth as we sort of trend towards legalization, Mexico, Australia, et cetera. So I find that data piece really interesting.
Yeah. Question? Yes, right with the mic.
My impression is that there has been and still is a pretty successful black market, call it what you want, industry in Canada. They've successfully launched brands. They award product quality at award shows. But it feels like the legal market is basically started from scratch. Maybe not the medical side, but certainly on the recreational side. I'm wondering, in terms of the future of sort of Cannabis 2.0, do you guys see the gap closing at all between sort of the collaboration between the black market and the legal market? Because it seems like a lot of the product quality issues, a lot of the marketing issues could be closed if we did that.
Andrea, do you want to take this?
Sure. I mean, the only way we're going to be able to pull people over to the legal market is to be able to, like I've said before, to brand, to know our clients as well, to know that people get to know us and we know them. I mean, we go through a lot of the provinces, we go through provincial wholesalers basically, where the province decides through some of the retail stores, and there are not a lot of them out here right now, but what product is selling quicker. At the beginning, they ordered a whole bunch of different products, not really knowing where the market was going to go. They just said, we're going to have a whole bunch of this and a whole bunch of that, and we're going to put them on the shelves. So there does need to be further education on the government side if they're going to continue being in the wholesale business, and also having the opportunity of having a lot more retail stores, because I mean, I think it's proven that people like to go and have their experience as well. People probably don't, and I'm just talking off the top of my head a little bit, but in alcohol, I don't think people order online as much as they would go into a store, talk to a sommelier, ask them what their advice is, how to pair with different foods. It's the same thing in cannabis, where you could, people want to go in and have that experience and talk to the bud tender, talk to someone who's actually knowledgeable about different products, and explain to them that this is the type of experience I want to have tonight. I want to stay at home. I want to put my feet up. I want to watch a movie, or maybe I want to go out and be real social, and that, well, there's something for everybody there. And unless we have that opportunity to be able to have our company be known, to be able to brand ourselves and stand out, then we're all kind of looped in the same bucket, really.
I hope that answers your question. Yes, at the back there.
Andrea, care to comment on whether Ontario will exit the wholesale and allow LPs to sell to retailers?
We've had some meetings recently with the government. Once the Ford government was elected, they were very keen on privatization. So they started working towards that. We had some very good meetings with the Attorney General's office and finance, and the people that the Attorney General's office is the one that carries the cannabis file. It took us a little longer to get into the Premier's office, but I think they've realized that they need to have more stores. I think the lottery schemes in Ontario, the lotteries were not very successful. So I think they realize that retail is really the way to go. How that is going to come about is really a policy decision that they're going to have to make. But it would probably be a good idea if they got out of the business altogether and let the industry do what it has to do in the competitive way. But if they decide they want to stay in the wholesale business, then there's a whole lot of education that needs to be had as well.
Mm-hmm. Do we have more questions? I think we're good.
Stay right here. I'm going to ask one of our sponsors from Castles, Marco Cialadiello, to come up and offer thanks.
So, my name is Marco Cialadiello. I'm from Castles Brock. We're a proud sponsor of the event tonight, and first and foremost, I'd just like to thank the panelists and the moderator for a wonderful and insightful presentation tonight. We all benefited from your knowledge on 1.0 and 2.0, so a round of applause. I think it's great to have an opportunity to discuss some of the obstacles, opportunities, perhaps some missed opportunities that we've seen in the cannabis market, both in Canada and now possibly internationally on a new frontier. At Castles, we pride ourselves at being at the cutting edge of providing legal advice to our cannabis industry partners, and we've dealt with many of the issues that were discussed today, particularly in my own practice as an IP lawyer, with branding, helping open retail stores across the country, and working with a variety of entrepreneurs and LPs to help realize the value that is in the cannabis industry. So I encourage everybody in the room to reach out, speak to the panelists and the moderator who are here for you and who are here to provide you with more insights about what opportunities are available in this space. And thank you all for coming out. Thank you to the Empire Club for putting on this wonderful event. And we all hope to meet you over by the bar. Thank you very much.
So I'll just say quickly in closing, I appreciate everyone coming out. I want to let you know that on November 5th, we have a business trade panel with some great folks who know a lot about the world of trade. Some former politicians, including Sean Charest, would be involved. And as well, on November 12th, we have the Alberta Finance Minister, Travis Taves, coming out. More events on our website as well. Thank you very much. This meeting is adjourned.